Hi, everybody. The name of my presentation here is Move Fast, Don't Break Things, Trends in Modern Web Development. And like Linda said, she asked me here to kind of talk about from an agency perspective how we're using Gatsby and kind of what we see going on. And really, I went with this title because, at an agency, I think for everybody, really what you want when you're doing a web project is you want it done quickly, you want it done under budget, you want it to spec, and you don't want any bugs, right? And so I think that Gatsby is really helping us do this. It's never going to be 100%, but I think it can help in the process. So more specifically, what I want to cover is I'll just give you a little bit of background on me. Kind of work I do. Then I'm going to go over some ways that I've worked with content management systems in the past few years and how it's changed over that time. I'll share a case study from a decoupled Drupal and Gatsby project that we took on earlier this year and some experiences we had with that. And then based on that experience, I want to discuss different ways decoupling can change things at an organization even. So that includes the development process, but I think for us, we're seeing it's going beyond the development process to changing maybe hiring and client diversity as well, which is cool to see. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Ben Robertson. I live in Greenville, South Carolina. This is my first time in the Bay Area, so I'm really enjoying it so far. And I'm a front-end developer at Mediacurrent. I got my start in front-end web development just a few years ago, actually. So I'm not a senior front-end developer or anything, and a lot of you guys probably have more experience than I do. But I got my start hacking on WordPress and Joomla sites as a freelancer after I watched just enough online dev courses to be really dangerous. And my first memory is getting the FTP credentials for my first client site and subsequently just taking it right down, just breaking it. And it was really stressful, but it was a great learning experience because you got that pressure and you got to figure it out as fast as possible. So after I gained that experience and other helpful experiences, I moved to a creative agency in Greenville, doing some more complex Drupal and WordPress builds for universities and other higher ed institutions. And now I'm at Mediacurrent, and I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary this week, actually, at Mediacurrent. And a little bit about Mediacurrent. We are a full-service digital agency, so we do strategy, design, development for enterprise organizations looking for a better ROI. And as Linda said, we are about 80 people. We actually had 5 new people start this week, so we're 82 strong this week, which is fun to see that number go up in our general channel in Slack. And on the development side, we've really traditionally been a Drupal shop. We really have some of the best Drupal developers around. Our devs are maintaining modules, they're hacking on core, they're really doing great things, and they're always pushing the envelope on ambitious projects with Drupal. This year, we've really enjoyed taking on some Gatsby projects, and so if you're looking for some Drupal work or some Gatsby work or something in between, feel free to give us a call. Or if you want to work in an agency that's doing that, we're always hiring, so get in touch. So now I want to do a little story time. So content management systems in the front end through the years, and this is not going to go back super far because I'm pretty new, but it still feels really old when I think about it. So I call this story the personal history of templating. So let's go back in time to 2015. In my version of 2015, React is not in the picture. I know it was in the picture for some people. In my small agency in Greenville, wasn't there. Hacking on WordPress sites, hacking on Drupal sites, and Drupal 7. And I still remember vividly the first time I was given some designs, and our project manager says, okay, we need to build this site, but we need to do it in Drupal 7. And first I Googled what is Drupal, and then I found Drupal.org, and then I downloaded Drupal 7, and then I started working on getting a local dev site set up. And then I figured out how to get a theme up and running. I had a theme up and running, but it actually took me several hours to figure out how to get any content onto the page. And maybe even more than a day. I don't know. It was a really long time. I remember that day. It was very frustrating. And I was still relatively new to web development, but I also at the same time knew how to write HTML, I knew how to write JavaScript, I knew how to do CSS. I was brand new to Drupal. But it was frustrating, and I think there was a lot of knowledge that I didn't have that I needed to have that was hard for me to find. So this is the template overrides portion of the story. So as I finally got content to render on the page, which took me a long time, this is how the theme structure ended up shaking out. I ended up with, like, you can see all these files in here. If you can see them on there, the contrast is a little low, but we have things like views, view, unformatted articles, attachment 1.tpl.php, node PDF page, feature content.tpl.php. So I had like this just like, I don't know, just grew so fast, these template files doing all these overrides. And then I had these directories, like I have blocks and files and system and view and regions and nodes and all this kind of stuff. And as I was getting started, it just wasn't clear to me. I was like, what? I have no idea what these things are. Why do these exist? I still just thought of like pages or templates or something like that. I couldn't figure out what all these things were. And then once I got inside the file, and I don't know if you can see, the comments are a little low contrast here, but I see these references to like PreProcess functions for these other things that I didn't know. So then I'm like, okay, well, where do I find those? Is that JavaScript? Is that PHP? Is that something else? And then once I find the data, I'm like, why are there so many arrays in this data? Like, I just want the word hello world. Like, how do I get that on the page? And where do I find this stuff? And like array, stuff in here like classes that's getting printed out. Where do I find that? And now looking back on this, like from a 2018 perspective, the other things I see are like in that folder structure, we didn't have any styles. So like where were the styles? And how do you maintain CSS that like could apply to markup that's all over the place? It could be in any number of files split up so many times. And where's the JavaScript and how does it relate to any of these templates? So at the time, to answer those questions, you needed a lot of domain-specific knowledge about Drupal. And if you are still maintaining a Drupal site, as I am, or a Drupal 7 site or a Drupal 6 site, you have to retain that knowledge. You have to know it even now. And then on top of this, I also built WordPress sites, and I maintain Cake PHP applications, and like all the different versions of Cake PHP, and all the different versions of Drupal, and WordPress is a little bit easier on that side. But then like, as a small agency, you do other stuff, like you hack on a weird Python application that a developer that doesn't work there wrote years ago, or a Salesforce knowledge base. And everything requires its own set. I'm not bitter about the Salesforce knowledge base. Everything requires its own domain-specific knowledge. And I just wanted to be a front-end developer, and I found myself spread thin across all these different domains. So as time went on, our small team of 3, we were feeling the strain of maintaining all these different domains, and so the logical thing was like, okay, well, let's streamline our front end, and I think that was really good. So we started experimenting with more component-focused development processes. So like you may be familiar with SMAC, Scalable and Modular Architecture for CSS, and that introduced separation between our global CSS and component-specific CSS, and so now we could jump into a Drupal project or Drupal 8 project or a KPHP project, and we could the CSS was all going to look the same, structure-wise at least. Similar with the BEM naming conventions, block element modifier for CSS, all our projects could use similar naming conventions, and so looking into CSS files started to become more similar for us. And so these SMACs and BEM, they gave us this component-driven process for writing CSS, but that didn't really bleed into other areas like markup or JavaScript, because we still had single-page template files, and we had really long jQuery files, that managed all the JavaScript in a site. So we also started experimenting with React, which was fun. So that helped us see that you could have a very self-contained component with CSS and markup and JavaScript all together. Or on a different train, we were looking at different pattern library workflows, so tools like Pattern Lab, Atomic Design, KSS. And our front ends, as this process went on, they became more component-focused, more streamlined, easier for us to switch projects on, but you still had to have all that domain-specific knowledge that came with each CMS and framework. It didn't go away. And so as I became more comfortable with these kind of processes and a component-driven approach, and still frustrated about being spread so thin across all those different domains, I came to Mediacurrent, and I'm very happily employed at Mediacurrent. And Mediacurrent, because we focused on one specific domain, which was Drupal, we're really able to take the component-driven approach to the next level from what I was used to. So this is an example. They leverage a tool called KSS Node. So KSS is if you're not familiar, it's a documentation syntax for CSS. So it lets you write comments in your CSS that it then generates a living style guide from. KSS Node has a twig extension, so you can include twig templates, and that populates your markup into the style guide. So now we have a twig file and a CSS file together, and that's very nice. And then you can include JavaScript in there as well. So we have one hero component, and you have all the hero component stuff in a single file. Now, conveniently, Drupal 8 uses Twig as its templating system. So we have this very nice synergy. Our node-based style guide can now use the same templates as Drupal. So we have this very nice synergy, right? So the backend and the front-end developers can be looking at the same templates, and theoretically, the front-enders can work exclusively in the style guide, and the back-enders can focus on the back-end. So it was really awesome. It was a really great workflow. We still use it. But it does have a few problems. So the main problem that I think that we're always having conversations about is we have an integration problem. So somebody somewhere has to get the content out of the CMS into the front end. And when you do this in templates, the logic can get a little bit hairy. So this is like, that hero component being implemented, but then you still have like all this trying to find the array and making it a string and checking and all this kind of logic. That still has to live somewhere. So in this example, it's in a template, and that makes your templates a little bit harder to read and harder to reason about. But then you can also do it in PHP, but then your front-end devs are still wondering, okay, where's the data? How do I change it? And they're not as familiar with that. And the second part of that is still you have that domain-specific knowledge because of this. So talk about integration. So you still have the Drupalisms, and we have a problem of how much Drupal knowledge do front-enders need, and how much do we really want front-enders to know about Drupal? Part of that problem that comes around that I see a lot is we've heard people mention different caching problems and stuff. And you have front-enders who strip out all of the markup that comes with Drupal because it's ugly and they don't want it. But really what I don't realize on the front end is that's actually what's creating a lot of the caching stuff that makes Drupal faster. And so the back end does something, and then the front end does something, and then the caching's not working, and we come together and we say, oh, well, you did this. And we're like, oh, well, you did that. Well, now we have a conversation, and then conversations slow things down, and that's more money for the client, and then we have to reconcile the differences. And so performance becomes an issue, right? So then we have this one system that has all the performance things tied into it. We have the server performance and PHP and front end and the file compilation and bundling, and Drupal or WordPress or whatever is handling all of that kind of stuff. And so you have to have very specific knowledge of what's happening in that system to make it all work together. It's not enough to know just how to write performant PHP or performant JavaScript, but you have to understand how that entire system is working together. And then you have to do a lot of load testing to make sure you actually understood it correctly, and then you have to pay a lot of money for hosting also on top of that. So I mentioned all that kind of stuff these are problems that they're part of a continuously ongoing conversation we have at Mediacurrent about the best way to front-end Drupal. And we have lots of smart people that do that. I'm really sure they're going to come up with a great solution for inside of Drupal because they're really good at that. But I also think that these issues relate to larger trends in the web industry, just like everybody was talking about this morning. And I think they have answers outside the problem sphere of Drupal. So the first kind of trend that I see going on, and we've talked about this, but front-end complexity. So the front end is just getting more complex. It's always been complex, right? So we've always had accessibility and performance, and that can be complex in itself. And we've always had, for the past few years, we've had responsive design. So trying to get every site look just exactly right on every single screen ever made, right? That was always a complex issue. But now it's really becoming more complex on top of that. So we're building web applications that rival native functionality. We're sending and receiving push notifications. We're doing prefetching and preloading to make things faster. Service workers are taking our sites offline, but in a good way. And then we have like all this future stuff that's like web workers with WebAssembly, and like I don't even know all about that stuff, right? It's just like every day there's a new article about something new that's coming, and it's so exciting. And we're getting so many capabilities on the front end, But as that happens, the stuff that you have to know to work on the front end, it's a lot more complex. It's a lot wider, and it becomes harder to keep all that stuff in your brain, plus all the Drupal stuff, or plus all the WordPress stuff. And so because of that, we have a stronger need for specialization. And for us as an agency, I think that specialization is going to help us remain competitive. And we want to be recognized as industry leaders, and we don't want to be so firmly stuck to what was the right way of doing something 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago, or even last year, that we miss out on the new opportunities that are all around us. And so in order to deliver the kinds of solutions our clients are looking for right now, we need our front-end developers to be able to focus on all the things that they're great at, and we need our back-end developers to be pushing the envelope on all the stuff that they're great at, so we can have excellent, fun teamwork. And where I really see this driving us as an agency, and all of us in the web industry, is towards decoupling the CMS. So I'm going to talk about decoupling the CMS. The content mesh is something that is exciting, but I think decoupling the CMS is always going to be there. That's my opinion. You can quote me on that if you want to. So the problems that I identified earlier, integration, like the domain-specific knowledge and performance, I think they all come from work that is centered specifically around content management systems. So I'm going to call it CMS-centered development. So I think really what we need to do is we need to unleash the full potential of the front end and the back end. And so when we're doing the CMS-centered development, we end up with like all that specific knowledge, and it's true whether any kind of CMS that it is. And we're going to risk out missing on new opportunities when we focus on that. And new opportunities come from letting the front end play to its strengths. They come from letting the back end play to its strengths. They come from letting the CMS play to its strengths. And so the main benefit to decoupling that I see is really letting the front end become better, faster, more advanced, with people that are better equipped to work on them, and then having a content management system that is more powerful and easier to use than ever before. So we want them to become the best versions of themselves. So to illustrate, I'm going to look at a real-life project. So the city of Sandy Springs is in Georgia. I live in South Carolina, so I have driven past this city every Thanksgiving for the past 4 years, and I did not know that this was actually in that city. I've driven past these buildings every 4 years, but it's in Sandy Springs. It's the 6th largest city in Georgia, and they were working on a new city development. It's an arts and cultural center. It's called City Springs, and they needed a website for it. But at the same time, they were adding these digital signs to that development, and then across the city, City Hall, and they needed a way to manage the content for those signs as well. And as you can imagine, they didn't want another 2 logins for every person on the team. They didn't want 2 new sites to log in to manage content and say, okay, did you update it here, and did you update it over there, and oh, by the way, did you update the sign? And so they had a dream of what they called a unified platform. And so for our scope of work, for phase 1 of the project, we laid out a plan to build out this unified platform. So it would manage content that, it would be a platform that would be extendable, would help them manage content on the City Springs site, as well as the digital signage in City Springs and like office break rooms in City Hall and across City Hall and all throughout the development and that kind of stuff. So to meet these requirements, we built a Drupal install, that's the unified platform, and then that Drupal install had a customizable RSS feed for the signs, so the signs pulled from those RSS feeds, and that powered them. And then we had a Gatsby site, and that was citysprings.com. And this is just the homepage of citysprings.com. Citysprings.com is the site if you want to check it out. Just to set the stage a little bit, this was an experimental project for us. So we had done decoupled Drupal before, pretty experienced with that, and we had done some digital signage work before, but this was our first project as a team that was using Gatsby, and it was a budget that was actually way under what we would normally do for a full Drupal 8 build, and that was scary for obvious reasons. And then we had never worked with this digital signage provider before. So that's kind of the stage that we start in, and I'll just dig in a little bit and show you kind of some of the stuff that we built. The core of the unified platform is that Drupal install. So when we talk about the unified platform, we're actually just logging into a regular Drupal 8 instance, and it's just an admin interface. So it doesn't have a front end. No public users are accessing the front end. We use the JSON API module to get that stuff out into an API, which then could come into Gatsby. And then, like I said, we had the custom RSS feed that we built to get the content over to the digital signage platform. And then to kind of like tell Drupal where the content should go, or tell the other places where the content should come from, we use a taxonomy structure, so that distributed and promoted the content. So when users are creating, like, they might be creating a new event, or they might be creating a new place, which would be like place inside of City Springs, or they might be creating a new news article. They have some fields that ask them where they would like to promote the content, where they would like the content to live. And there were three main ways they could do this. So the first one was through a destination taxonomy. This determined where the content should live. So if a user selected citysprings.com, then the Gatsby site would that would get pulled through the Gatsby site and would be published there, and that's where that content would live. We also, that one's pretty straightforward, right? So then we had a tagging structure as well. So tags were used for two things. On the City Springs site, there was like an events page that just had a list of all the events. They have a concert hall, so there's like comedy shows and music performances and all that kind of stuff. And so tags were used to be able to filter on that page, so also pretty straightforward. The cool part about tagging that I thought was really cool is that is the part that came into the RSS feeds. So we had like a default URL that would pull in all the content from that's created as an RSS feed, but then you could also customize and filter the feeds based on the URL structure. Oh, I forgot to turn that off. Where's my mouse?
You take a break.
Sorry, I gotta look away from the computer for a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so basically, say there's a digital sign in the City Hall break room, and they want that sign to display news like that's just specific for city employees. They would put in a URL, and it would be like unifiedplatform.com/feed/news/city employees. And then that sign would pull in just the content that's published underneath that tag for city employees. So the URLs can be combined, or they can be remixed. The tags can be combined. You can pull in different content types. Basically, it powered all the signs throughout the city, and each sign could have its own custom feed that was coming to it from Drupal, which was a really powerful experience for them. And then the third and last way of distributing the content was through what we called like a promotion taxonomy. So promotion spots are places where content that lives in one place can be promoted in another. So one example that we used was inside of Gatsby, we created like a URL structure that would let them have like basically content that could be inside an iframe. So it would be, instead of like outputting like a full page, it would just be like a single component, like a menu component or a slider or something like that. And then they could take that iframe and put that on any of their properties, and it would stay up to date from the content there. And that, as a phase one part of the project, that really helped drive home the point that this was a unified platform that could publish content to any city property that existed. I think that was a big selling point for their team. And then the other part that we did was just like promoting content to menus and sidebars in the actual City Springs site. So just to recap, we built them a Drupal install with like a customizable RSS URL and a Gatsby site for citysprings.com. But what they really got was a content management system that could manage any amount of signs across the entire city. So it could do it inside the development, but they can, as they grow their signage, they'll be able to manage every single sign. They can manage the content for a single web property now and any amount of other web properties in the future, be the Gatsby sites or any other kind of decoupled site. And then they can also manage content that's embeddable on any web property, like whether it's a city property. If they just want to get some fresh content on a site, but they don't want to redo the whole site, they can stick an iframe on there and do that. And then they got it on time and on budget, which they always makes the client happy. With the City Springs Gatsby site specifically, they got a fast, reliable site built with some of the newest best front-end practices that like Sam was pointing out earlier today. And they got a site that was easy for their developer to work on. So they had a front-end developer on their team. He didn't have any Drupal experience, right? So if we handed him a big Drupal install, he was not going to know what to do with that. But like he can make style changes to CSS. I mean, we just use basic CSS. And he understands markup and React and that kind of stuff. And so he could make changes to the system after we handed it off. And they saved a lot of money on hosting. I mean, we were, you know, normally a site like this would, I mean, it's a city site, it needs to be very reliable. They did not have to have the huge hosting kind of thing that they would normally do. And we hosted on Netlify for free. I mean, the Drupal backend was still hosted, and it's still very reliable. But the hosting thing was something they were really happy about because they saved a significant portion of budget that they already had to set aside. And then they decided, they're like, hey, you guys just saved us a bunch of money, and also we would like some new features, so can we please pay you that money to make new features for us? So from our perspective, that was a huge win as well, right? So they saved on hosting, and that was more revenue for us because we got to do more work for them. And then we were able to deliver the project on time, right on budget, to spec, with minimal bugs, right? There's always a few bugs. And when we did our internal retrospective on this project, a theme that kept coming up was how this was our first time using Gatsby. So it wasn't like this was our 10th Gatsby site and like finally we figured it out. It was our first one, and our project budget was smaller than what we would normally have set aside for a full Drupal 8 build. But that was still generous enough to get us through all the learning curves of taking on a new technology, the new conventions, figuring out the source plugins and that kind of stuff. It was before some of the stuff that Shannon talked about. We didn't have all the UX improvements to the Gatsby docs, and so I'm sure it'll be even faster next time. And now we've resolved those issues for ourselves internally, and so our workflow is even more streamlined for future Gatsby projects, and our internal knowledge is a lot stronger, and we won't face those same hurdles again. So those are some of the outcomes that were specific to this project, but I just want to touch on some of the larger themes that I came to see during the project that I think are a result of decoupling the CMS. So it changes the dev process. It helps you type a lot faster, right? So I feel like the speed, there's performance gains, like actual performance gains, but also just like things get done faster. So on the front end for City Springs, we got a front end that did exactly what we needed, and it didn't do anything else. It just did exactly what we wanted it to. So as I kind of talked about earlier, and Sam mentioned earlier this morning, content management systems, they have a very opinionated way that you have to do everything. You got to do their templating structure, and you got to like figure out how their bundling works and all that kind of stuff, and you got to figure out how to get the content out of the arrays and all that, you know. There's always boilerplate markup you have to override because you're a front-end developer and you don't like it, and and there's pages that like are default accessible to the internet, but like you're not actually going to use that page, so you have to figure out how to like make a redirect so it'll change it to something else. But like for us with Gatsby, we were only building exactly what we needed. At its core, it's just React components, and they can be pretty much structured any way you want them. I'm excited to see what we're going to talk about with themes later, because I think that'll be helpful. But really, this was one of the benefits to us, was like that there was not a lot there. No need to override, no need to delete. And if we needed something like pre-made, we could get it from NPM and just pass our data into it. And then we're also free to adopt the latest best practices. So we didn't have to figure out a way to shoehorn React into Drupal or NPM modules into the Drupal bundler. And if we need to, we can switch Gatsby out later with a different front end and still use that same thing. Not that that's going to happen, but we're very flexible. It's so flexible, right? So, and let's see, performance. No, not that yet, right? Okay. So also we just, I mean, I didn't touch on this yet, but the actual performance, people have been talking about this all day, but the performance of our front end is now way more independent from our backend infrastructure. So it's static HTML. It's not going to fall over. We don't need to be concerned with like you did a bad for loop in PHP and now the whole thing is about to explode, since that stuff is rarely being touched, right? Like we've divided up the stack and we've made it less likely to fall over. I really like that image that Sam shared earlier. You talked about modularized architecture. And I think one of the downfalls, right, is you have more points of failure, but the upside is that they're more isolated. And so like if the Drupal side goes down, the front end HTML does not break. So people can't really tell on the front end if it's broken because it's still there, which is really nice. And if there ends up being a performance issue on the front end, we know exactly that it's a front end performance issue. So we don't have to create a ticket and hand it to the lead backend dev and say, hey, something's wrong with this. And he's like, oh, I don't know. Let me like look and see in the logs. And then like he's like, oh, I think it's a front end issue. And then like the front end developer takes it and he's like, well, no, I don't know. This image is too big and the image styles aren't configured correctly, right? Like you don't have all this like back and forth. Not that I've ever had that conversation, but right, you have all this back and forth and it's so complicated because like one person knows one thing and another person knows another thing, and neither of you is really sure if you're right or you're both right or what's happening. If it's a front end problem, we know it's a front end problem in the Gatsby world, and so we don't have to like switch hats and we don't have to have those conversations. And then right, we have the preloading and prefetching, and that's just like awesome, and it's static HTML and it's so much faster. It's lightning fast. And then the development process changes. So like with the fully decoupled approach we took with Gatsby and Drupal, we were able to leverage a pretty asynchronous dev timeline. So I started on the Gatsby site before we had an up and running Drupal site. And you don't need the backend to start development. And I think that's so cool. Like even with our component-based like KSS structure that we had, we still had to have a Drupal install to put that theme into when we made it. But with this, you can, sorry, I talked too much, my computer went to sleep. You can start development with JSON files or Markdown files, and you can just mock the data structure that you expect to have. And then later when the backend is built, you just plug it in with GraphQL to match that structure of the JSON that you mocked up. And one thing that I talked about earlier was like the integration part and all the problems that happen with integration. In my experience with full Drupal builds, integration between the front end and back end, it causes headache during development because you have mismatched expectations between the front end and back end. But then even beyond development, like into the maintenance period of things, that's where stuff gets really confusing because like you did it this way back when you were developing and you were in there every day, and then 6 months down the road or 1 year down the road, you're like, wait, why did I output that as raw text, or why is this a certain way, or did I do that in PHP, or did I do that in the template? And it becomes a lot harder to reason about. So the integration layer is where a lot of maintenance issues can come into play. But with Gatsby, the integration layer happens in GraphQL, and having a convention, the GraphQL convention, and the very simple syntax for getting data, it goes a long way to speeding up the dev process. Like you don't have to worry about that. You know exactly, it lives in your page structure, it lives in your component. You can just look and see exactly how the data is coming out. And then we have the graphical interface too. So like if I didn't know anything about Drupal, I could open up the graphical interface and just like explore and see, okay, what data is available to me at any level, at any query here. And that is helpful for our front-end devs because maybe some of them don't have Drupal experience and they don't know like exactly how all the media relationships work because it can be confusing. And you don't have to do a var dump to see like with all the arrays and like figure out where stuff is. You can just like see it and click on it. It's so nice. And the last, but I think the most important point was that decoupling the CMS really unleashes the power of the content management system in ways we wouldn't have thought possible a few years ago. So traditionally, people I've seen this in slides, right? One CMS is one website. And now the content management system can be so much more than a single website. It has the potential to power an entire organization, or as we're seeing with Sandy Springs, it can power an entire city, which like that's so cool, you know? I don't know, just I think we're really going into new places where what the CMS can do. So last I want to talk about is how decoupling can change the organization, because I think it's starting to make changes for us as well. So I'll talk about hiring first. Earlier, I outlined kind of the progression of front-end development that I have followed over the past few years. And we talked about domain-specific knowledge, and I think this has the biggest impact on hiring because when we hire, we want people to come in and be able to hit the ground running as fast as possible and do billable work because that's how we make money. We don't want to have months of training or anything like that to be able to help us make money. So we want them to know the basics off the bat. But when you hire someone, you have to say, okay, well, what basics do we prefer? Do we prefer the Drupal basics or the WordPress basics or the CMS basics or the front-end basics or any kind of domain-specific thing? Finding a really good front-end developer who is also an experienced Drupal developer can be very challenging. Finding a really good Drupal developer who also knows front-end or the other way around, it's just challenging. And so isolating those two skill sets goes a long way towards finding people who are specialized, who are really good at one or really good at the other. You don't have to find someone who knows both necessarily. And that makes, for us, that makes our front-end hiring pool a lot bigger because it's a lot easier to find front-end devs who know React or want to work with React than it is to find front-end devs who know Drupal or want to work with Drupal. And then for us, that also translates into a more specialized front-end developer skill set because people who have that kind of experience, they've done other kinds of work like that, and all of a sudden we have a more experienced team. We're more specialized. And as our team becomes more specialized, now we can go into different areas of development, and the kinds of clients we can take on can change a little bit. So whereas before every site was a full Drupal build that had just had a baseline of like, okay, this is how long it takes us to do a full Drupal build with all the server requirements, caching, and all that kind of stuff. We had a fairly high threshold for the kind of budgets we could work with, and anybody underneath that budget, we're like, sorry, like we're just not going to be able to work with you. Sandy Springs would have been one of those clients for us. And with Gatsby, with how much it's sped up our front-end workflow and just our workflow in general, we can take on smaller projects and they can still be profitable for us. And they can be really fun too. They don't have to be like stressful nail biters where you're like, okay, don't spend too much time on that because I don't know if we're going to make any money. And I think Gatsby really shines here, and I think this is our biggest opportunity. One of our biggest opportunities at Mediacurrent right now is to kind of take on these projects more and kind of a more front-end focus. And then like with projects like that, once your initial engagement is over and you've built something really cool for a client and it's like it's fast and it's reliable and like it's not complicated, then they're all of a sudden they want to spend more money with you because they like the work that you did and the money that you saved them and how reliable you were. And then I also mentioned, but beyond the budget aspect, working in Gatsby, it just gives all our developers, our front-end developers, more experience in modern JavaScript and modern development practices. And that has also translated new work opportunities for us. Whereas, you know, in the past we were stuck in a jQuery land or not able to use some of the latest development best practices. Now we are able to do that on our front ends. The front-end developers are a lot happier, and we're getting more experience, and we're able to take on new projects that maybe don't even touch a Drupal backend. That's really exciting for me. It's really exciting for our team, and I think could be very exciting for all of you. So just to wrap up, I think that leveraging the advantages that I've outlined of decoupling the front end from the content management system is going to really change the way we work at Mediacurrent and how just a lot of people are working on the web. And for us, it's helped us speed up our development process. We're moving faster. We're building more reliable sites. We're breaking them less. And we're doing them for less money while remaining profitable and doing it on budget. So I think we'll have time. I think we have time for questions now. Do we have time? Okay. But just if you want to learn more about us, you can go to mediacurrent.com. You can email me if you have questions that don't get answered now, or come by and talk to me after. I'm happy to talk to anybody. So thank you very much.